Hey there, it's Jer, and this is your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, January 20th, 2021. On today's show, Kwame Kilpatrick will be a free man. We dig into how and a bit of history you might not know. Plus, Diane Cross from the Michigan Department of Transportation joins me to preview the big 2021 road projects in our region, including a major rebuild at 8 and Telegraph and work on I-94. Let's just get started. In his final hours in office, President Donald Trump commuted the sentence of former Detroit Mayor Kwame Kilpatrick, freeing him after serving about 7 years in prison on a 28-year sentence for corruption. It's important to note that a commutation is not a pardon. A commutation reduces the sentence but does not wipe away the conviction, in this case on 24 charges of racketeering and bribery back in 2013. The relief had been pushed by a number of local allies, including Representatives Karen Whitsitt and Sherry Gay Dignogo, as well as business magnate Peter Karmanos, founder of CompuWare. Kilpatrick walks free with a number of debts he owes connected to suits and judgments totaling around $11 million still due, including $852,000 to the city of Detroit connected to the infamous text message scandal. Under a state law passed a decade ago, since this is a commutation, he will not be eligible to run for elected office until 2033. He's 50 years old right now. Reaction to the news has been mixed, with some thinking Kilpatrick should have served the entire 28-year sentence, others believing the sentence didn't fit the crime, and a number of diehards maintaining he did nothing out of the ordinary for politicians and so he should not have been charged. Of note, current Detroit Mayor Mike Duggan supported the decision, and I quote from Twitter, "Kwame Kilpatrick is a person of great talent who still has much to contribute. I know how close he is to his 3 sons, and I could not be happier for them being together again. This is a decision President Trump got right," unquote. Well, here's a little history for you on how Duggan knows Kilpatrick rather well. Duggan was a former deputy Wayne County executive and Wayne County prosecutor. He often dealt with former county executive Ed McNamara, a longtime power broker in our region. But now that I think about it, dealt with probably isn't the best phrase. After a loss, Duggan began lobbying the at-the-time Livonia mayor, Ed McNamara, to run again for county executive back in 1986, and he was his campaign manager. McNamara won, and Duggan was then appointed to that deputy executive post. Eventually, McNamara's chief of staff was Bernard Kilpatrick, Kwame Kilpatrick's father, and McNamara had a lot to do with Kilpatrick's first successful election run in 2006. Detroit is, after all, the biggest small town you'll ever meet. Joining me on the line is Diane Cross. She does communications with MDOT, the Michigan Department of Transportation, tends to focus on the metro region. Diane, welcome to Daily Detroit.
Thank you so much. Glad to be here.
There are a number of projects happening in Detroit and in the metro region that are going to impact drivers in 2021. Before we get into doing a rundown, focused on Detroit and nearby here, I will say that anything that we talk about, this is preliminary as far as dates and lanes and all that kind of stuff, right? Some of those pieces are still shifting.
Correct. Before a project gets done, you have to get all the pieces together, send it to Lansing where we verify the cost and the work that's going to be done and all of that, and then we put it out for bid. And then the winning contractor gets to determine some of the things like the start date, the schedule, how and when we're going to do some lane closures and that type of thing, because they're coordinating their own work that goes on throughout the state. And I do want to clear one thing, if I could, that when we're talking about MDOT, we are the state roads. That is only the I, M, and U.S. roads. And then other roads that are not I, M, or U.S., those are city, county, or township roadways. So I-75, M24, US 24, those are all state roads. So anything we talk about today involves only the state roads.
Gotcha. And in general, how are these projects funded for 2021?
MDOT normally gets money from the state legislator as part of our budget, and it's over a 5-year period where they're constantly evaluating our needs versus the state legislature funding, that type of thing. And then the governor gave additional money for the rebuilding of Michigan, and we're using a lot this year. So when we start to talk about some of the projects, we're going to be working everywhere in Wayne, Oakland, and Macomb County.
Well, let's dive into it. First off, I want to start on a freeway that I know is near and dear to the hearts of our listeners, and that is I-94. It runs through the heart of the city. I figure we may as well start there, and then we can get into everything else that's happening. So what is the work happening on 94?
Well, I-94, for the last few years, we've been working on replacing a lot of the bridges because 94 is pretty much the oldest freeway that we have in Metro Detroit. And from county line with Macomb into and just past I-75, we've already, I think it's a total of 66 bridges over the few years of planning, and we've already done maybe a dozen of them. But this year we're going to be working at 2nd and Brush, which means at times we're going to have I-94 closed east and west between M10 and 75 while we do bridge demo to bring down the bridges. And then when steel beams have to come in, so drivers anywhere between the Lodge and 75 on 94, you're going to find a couple of weekend closures because of that. And then we're also working on a couple of smaller bridges because they're more of the turnaround or small local roads, but they still go over 94, so therefore they become MDOT bridges. At Frontenac, Burns, and Cadillac, we're going to be replacing those bridges as well. And again, we try not to affect the freeway traffic too much, but there will be some weekend closures because of that.
Well, a lot of that infrastructure is rather old. I actually used to live a half block away from 94 at John R. and 94. I need to impact on listeners just how old this infrastructure is, right?
Yeah, we go back to, I think, very early 60s. So we're talking 50, 60 years on some of the bridges that go over I-94 as the long-term plan of how do we replace. Again, it was a 66 bridge project in Detroit. You could only do so many a year because we really do consider the drivers. I know a lot of drivers don't think we do, but we totally consider mobility and how we're affecting the 100 and 150,000 drivers a day who use 94, which is why we try to limit the closures to the weekends whenever possible, because we are trying to consider how do we affect the least number of people for vital work that has to get done.
That makes sense. There are a number of other projects happening around town, right?
Also in Detroit, we're going to be working on the Davison. That's actually M8, which makes it a state road. Between Rosa Parks and Oakland, we're going to do some concrete pavement repair there. And again, that'll have what we call off-peak hours. So for road conditions, we consider morning and afternoon drive to be 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. That's morning. And then 3 to 7 is afternoon drive. So we use off-peak, which is from 9 to 3. Now, people who sleep in the morning and they don't start till 9, to them, that's morning. But for driving in that whole world of the roads, 9 to 3 is off-peak. So that's when we try to limit our lane closures. Unless it's an emergency, we don't do work that lands in either 6 to 9 or 3 to 7 because, again, it affects the largest number of people. But we are going to be working on the Davison. And then we're also going to be working on a number of bridges on I-75 between M8, Nevada and Meade over 75, and then there's a couple of railroad bridges as well. And again, we try to limit any closures to the weekend. In Detroit, we're also going to be working on 75 right at the border, 8 Mile up to 13 Mile. We continue to reconstruct 75. I-96, if you're heading out into Oakland County from 275 to Kent Lake, also in Oakland, M15 up to the Genesee County line. We're going to be just doing some wrap-up work on 94 out to the airport, heading out toward Washtenaw, trying to clean up last year's project. We do some landscaping and a minimal work. But one of the biggest projects, there's two of them, 275 from 6 Mile all the way down to the Monroe County line.
Ooh.
That is a long stretch. I want to say 25 miles. Some of it is just concrete repair, which is stuff we can do on the weekend. And then as you get closer to Eureka, up to 5 Mile, we're totally reconstructing it. And when we use the word reconstruct, we're pulling everything out, breaking up the concrete, going down to the sand pretty much to rebuild that roadway. But 275, we're going to try to leave 2 lanes open in each direction from Eureka to 6 Mile and still let drivers use it. But again, whenever there's construction, even with 2 lanes, you're going to have slowdowns. But that's going to be a big one that's going to affect a lot of drivers. But also, we're going to be working on Telegraph from Grand River up to 8 Mile. We're reconstructing that as well. Going to tear everything out, but we're going to leave 2 lanes open through that roughly 2.5 mile stretch for drivers to use. And then we're adding something brand new at 8 Mile. It's brand new for this area. It's called a DDI, a diverging diamond interchange. We put one in at University over 75 a couple of years ago. And while it sounds quite different, it's actually a reconfiguration of the road that will make it a lot safer for turns. If anybody uses that 8 Mile Telegraph area, you know those ramps coming off 8 Mile are super short. They're real tight turns.
They feel like they're from another era.
And they really are, because again, that's probably a 50, 60-year-old interchange, maybe not quite that old, maybe 45, 50 years old. When that would have been built, we certainly didn't have the volume of traffic. We certainly didn't have the size of not only passenger cars, but trucks. So if you are ever behind a truck and you see them go up and over the curb, and because it's such a short ramp, we've got a yield sign at one and a stop sign at another, which people don't expect to see a stop sign. So we have tons of rear end crashes. We have people trying to merge from the ramp onto northbound Telegraph. That's a real short, what we call an acceleration lane, which means people aren't quite sure how can I get over, or they're not speeding up fast enough. So we have a lot of crashes. I want to say we've had 300 in the last couple of years just at that interchange. So we're going to reconfigure that interchange of Telegraph under 8 Mile with a diverging diamond. And what it is you're not really going to be able to tell as a driver. You're going to follow the signals that lead you through the interchange. But if you were to look at it from the sky, it looks a little bit different in the sense of how the lanes cross over one another. But we're going to eliminate left-hand turns are usually when you use that, but it will eliminate a lot of these short ramps. It'll give people more space to speed up into the merging lane, and it'll just make it a much safer interchange. And again, the name sounds different, but you're really just going to follow like you would on any road. Green you go, red you stop, and that's really all you're going to see.
Yeah, and looking from above, it's a more streamlined design and deals with the reality of different speeds and different vehicles. One of the things that you said that I want to talk about for a quick second before I let you go, what is the impact of larger vehicles on road design today? Because vehicles are different than they were 20 years ago, different than they were 40 years ago. What does that impact have on road design and the work that you guys have to do?
Well, I admit I'm not a designer, so I can only speak for what I know in the sense of one little side thing is that I know I have heard in some conversations about the autonomous vehicles, right? The fact that vehicles are going to be able to drive themselves, that they will not have to have as much room between cars because those vehicles will stay literally in their lane. Whereas for current conditions, we have to have the lanes so far apart and to allow a little bit of wiggle room as drivers don't always stay right in their lane, or they don't, when they go to turn, they go into other lanes. So a lot of thought is given into that. And a majority of the information used in designing a current road, which brings it up to current safety standards, which again, if an interchange is 45, 50 years old, it's not current. They look at the number of crashes. And what kind of crashes? Were they rear end, which is quite dangerous? Is it head on, which is incredibly dangerous, the most dangerous? Where side swipes, not as dangerous, that type of thing. So all those different variables are used in the designing of what is going to be the safest design of the road. Because again, we can't design for all human error, right? Human nature, there's a lot of things that we cannot design for, that we can put guardrails up and stop signs and signals and that type of thing. But we design the majority to tell drivers where to go to get you safely where you're going. And so there's a lot of factors that are involved in that.
Diane, I really appreciate you taking the time and walking through the projects. I think that it'll be something that will hopefully lower the number of crashes because everybody wants people to be safe on the roads out there.
Exactly. And we do believe it's going to lower it. I want to say the number I saw last was maybe 30%, 25-30% fewer crashes. And again, the types of crashes are also a big factor. And if we can eliminate people rear-ending each other or head-on collisions, that's when it will be a safer roadway, and that's our goal.
Diane Cross, MDOT, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Before I let you go, a quick word from one of our listeners, Michael. He forwarded me an email that caught my attention for, as what he said, it didn't have. It directed me to a couple of local news updates from large local outlets. I don't want to name names because I have friends in some of these places who are working as hard as they can. But look, their big bosses have them stretched thin. Finances are tight. But those emails, those updates had less than 10% local content this week. And he's listening to us because we're actually doing local work and wishes that we did more. So I try to focus on what we do instead of what others don't. But it was a wake-up call. There are so many more stories to be told and a real need to get out thoughtful local information, include more voices. There's a big list. And to be honest, local storytelling has taken it on the chin the last few years, cuts everywhere, but we've been able to be a little bit of a bright spot thanks to our members and our new underwriters you'll hear from, including Fusion Marketing and Frugal on the Fly. So we need your help to redouble our efforts. There's so much more to be done. Do more reportings, sending show notes out via email, highlighting stories, and some editing help behind the scenes. There's just a ton of stuff to do. one day after the pandemic, we'd even love to have a studio somewhere in the city, if that makes sense. Even before then, do live events, places around town. There's just a big list. But to do any of that, it takes resources, and we need your support. Join us at patreon.com/dailydetroit as a member, or email me at jer@dailydetroit.com. Let's get to work. And we're done for today. Thank you so much for listening to Your Daily Detroit. Also, thanks to Jonathan for that note you sent. We'll keep on those beats around town, and thanks for the kind words about Fletcher Sharp's work. I know he'll appreciate it. Also, thanks to engineer Randy Walker and Cheyenne Nocerini for helping produce this particular episode. With that, I'm Jer Stays. Take care of each other, and we'll get through this together. Hey there, it's Jer, and this is Your Daily Detroit for Wednesday, January 20th, 2020. If only. Well, let's do this again.